I didn't have a job and I didn't have any savings, and I bought a one-way ticket anyway. During which time I was a travel vlogger, I wrote travel guides, I also worked on vineyards, picked persimmons, was a perfume salesperson at the Auckland airport. This is a story of how I went from having literally $0 in my bank account, leaving with a one-way ticket, to becoming my own boss, making full-time income online, and how it all came crashing down. But wait, let's save the juicy details for later. More than anything, this is the story of how running away from everything led me to finally meet myself. It was 2017 and I had just gotten out of a terrible, awful 5-year-long relationship, and my self-worth was at its all-time low. Plus, I was at the tail end of graduating from UCLA with a degree in applied linguistics. However, while my peers were applying for master's programs or applying for internships, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but not only that, I wasn't ready to start committing my body and my soul to climbing the corporate ladder. So, feeling lost as I was, going through my own dark night of the soul moment, I decided to buy a one-way ticket and travel by myself for indefinitely long. I think I had this romanticized vision in my head, this odd trust that if I just put myself out there, that some opportunity or path would open up to me. I would magically meet people on the road, get to know them, and maybe someone would offer me a job opportunity. I don't know what I was searching for, but I felt like it was out there. I decided to run as far as I could in hopes of finding clarity, maybe abundance, maybe even love. Nobody ended up giving me a job on the road, but I got something even better. I became my own boss. And while I did find love temporarily on the road, I found something even better. I got closer to myself than ever and finally found my way back home. Okay, right before I left, I was working at this restaurant called Sugarfish. Some of you might know what it is. It was one of the most intense and horrible most stressful job I've ever been at. So unexpectedly, I quit before I had planned to. I wanted to save up as much money as I could before I left, obviously to sustain my travels. Not only that, I also had some friends that were very convincing, and I invested a huge amount of my savings in this thing called crypto. So by the time that I left with my one-way ticket out of LAX, I had a small amount of credit card debt and zero savings in my bank. I will be honest and frank here, the first stop I made was to visit family back home in China. And luckily, my dad gave me a small sum of money that helped me pay off that credit card debt, and with just a little bit extra for me to continue. A few months prior to me graduating, I watched countless hours of solo female travelers on YouTube. And then somehow I got the brilliant idea that I myself would buy a camera, initially not to become a YouTuber, but simply to keep myself grounded. I didn't want to just wander aimlessly. I was a studious person and fairly disciplined. So I wanted to document my travels and have something to do, kind of like a homework at the end of a long travel day. I know that I might be a little crazy for thinking this way, but it eventually did pay off. When I arrived in Indonesia, that was when I really started to document my travels, and I would publish them on my YouTube channel. I had never filmed anything before. I did not know how to edit. I'd never spoken on camera prior to that, but little by little, I started to learn how to do everything. By the time I got to Thailand, I ended up meeting someone, and my YouTube channel was still really, really small. I mean, there were barely any views, and I was nowhere near qualifying for monetization. The two of us kept traveling together, and in March of 2018, I made a quick pit stop back home in LA, and that was when one of my videos that I recorded kind of took off. It was a video on how to travel to China. And of course, being someone that's born in China, has lived in the US, I was that perfect bridge. That was also when I started to realize that there were two primary ways to grow a YouTube channel. Either you are here to entertain or you are here to educate. So I leaned into that. I started to create videos that was really helpful, travel guides to specific destinations. And I remember the first month that I actually made money from my YouTube channel. I think it was like a couple $100s from AdSense. And then I also had maybe like $80 from affiliate income. And I was so excited. I couldn't believe that I was able to actually make money by making travel videos. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. enough. And it was getting to a point where I had to consider the possibility of returning home. So my then boyfriend and I decided to apply for a New Zealand working holiday visa. We thought it was a great idea for us to continue to travel and see New Zealand while working and saving up more money. We arrived in the late summer of 2018 to Auckland and ended up finding a job working on vineyards, pruning grapevines. So we were up at like 5 or 6 a.m., bundled up because it was really cold. We had these gloves that we would wear, and it was just rows and rows of grapevines that we had to, I don't even remember what it's called, but you had to cut them, wrap them on the wire, and then tie them. And it was literally just 8 hours on our feet every day doing that. But then before and after, I would continue to make travel videos as well as working on my website. For those of you that might be watching because you want to do something like that, I absolutely understand how it feels like it's impossible to just uproot your life and get on the road like this. And I wasn't even that young when I left. I was 28 when I left on this indefinitely long trip. But I met so many people on the road that was making it work, these so-called digital nomads. And I know now there's this kind of like cringe factor to them, but these people were making money in so many different ways. Some people had businesses, some people were doing drop shipping, some people were teaching English. It opened up my capacity to believe and to see possibilities. And I think that was one of the most impactful and profound things that I absorbed while I was traveling: possibility. What was really important for me too was up until that point, as I mentioned, prior to leaving, my self-worth was at its all-time low. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to run away. But there was a very succinct moment when I was living in this really rural house somewhere in New Zealand, and something settled in me. And it was the first time in my 28, 29 years of life that I actually believed in myself, in my capabilities of creating something, building something, and sustaining that thing. And I know this narrative of law of attraction and manifestation has become a lot more popular again in the last decade. And I was full in on those things, trust me. But it really wasn't until I saw the results of what I actively put out there, the things that I was willing to spend hours on building and learning, those actions that I took was what finally actually made me believe in myself in such a core way that it wasn't a needing to convince my brain before I saw it was a possibility. I could see that I could do it. This became my new identity. Eventually, being a travel vlogger became my full-time job, and I was living in Mexico at the time. But even starting back when I was in New Zealand, I had started to revisit my biggest love, the thing that I was most passionate about. I'd started reading books on spirituality, self-improvement, philosophy, psychology since I was a teenager. And the further that I ran away from my home and myself, the more I realized that I couldn't run away. Somehow it was being out there in the world and getting lost in the world that finally brought me to turn the mirror back in onto myself. And I think that's where a huge degree of healing and self-growth happened. And I began to make videos, a series called Chat with Dia, where I talked about mindfulness, meditation, self-worth, self-belief. And it was around that time I went back home to Los Angeles for just a quick stop. Exactly the day on my birthday, March 20th, the world shut down. And by the time the lockdown happened, I was stuck back in Los Angeles. Traveling wasn't an option. The travel industry was completely dead. I realized maybe it was time for me to begin again, start anew. I can't believe it's already been almost 8 years since I left with that one-way ticket. When the world shut down in 2020, I didn't work for about a year and a half, and I was completely lost and having to face this uncomfortable place that I've always dreaded, which is the transitional phase, the liminal space, if I can say, between what is no longer and what is not yet. And since my travel career ended, I have been a rebranding consultant. I have worked for a travel company, a startup. I have become a personal trainer, also a brand manager. Side story, actually, in 2020, I was tricked by some scammers. My YouTube channel, the travel one, was actually hacked and deleted, hence the birth of this channel. Since then, a lot has changed. I am a completely different person from where I was when I left. One of the most important things I learned that sometimes you don't have to have everything figured out to take the leap, but that the leap itself will show you what you're capable of, that only by taking that first step will you find more steps to follow. The most important core element is this home that we build here within ourselves. The home that can weather breakups and moving and losing jobs and having to start all over again, picking up new skills. I've realized fundamentally how important that core piece can dictate how we live, not just through big shifts and moments in our lives, but every day. The choices that we make, the people that we choose to have in our lives. And it's perfect that this is now the focus of my channel. If you've ever felt frustrated because you have this vision and belief that there's another version of you that's just right there, yet it seems like you can't close the gap and meet them, or if you've been spending countless hours listening to podcasts, watching videos, reading books, yet everything doesn't feel embodied. It feels like it's just cognitive knowledge. I would love to invite you to check out diajin.com. I first started making these videos, I think, partly for these younger versions of myself. The versions that was lost, searching, in despair, confused, and frustrated. And the more I put these videos out, the more I've gotten response from other people telling me how the analogy I used helped them reframe the way that they understood a concept. Or maybe it was the way that I delivered a concept that finally helped them make sense of it and made it click in place. I want to help you bridge that gap, to take concepts like self-worth and self-love into actual embodied lived experiences. Because the point of doing all these things isn't to keep healing or growing forever, but to go out there and live in the real world, to finally live the kind of life where you say yes to the things that nourish you and no to the things that don't, to figure out what it is are the blocks or repeating patterns that's keeping you stuck and how to move forward to a different choice, how to start actually inviting and accepting the kind of connections that you think you want but haven't been able to find, to finally have the tools to get out of your own way. If you visit diajin.com, you can find out different ways to work with me one-on-one, whether it's short-term or longer term. I'm also planning to launch courses, but that's still in the works right now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.